elections in Nigeria.
Presidential candidate of Nigeria's main President Goodluck Jonathan
We see a government that believes in propaganda.
Opponent, former General Muhammadu Buhari.
The closest fought contest in Nigeria's modern history.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're tracking this week. Nigeria finally goes to the polls for its presidential election. It's a big story, but is the electorate getting the information that it needs? 800 million Indians live rural lives, but the Indian media do not consider them newsworthy. You can add Reuters to the list of Western news organizations encountering difficulties in China, and the art of deception and how it can confuse the critics. When the presidential debate was held in Abuja this past week, just ahead of the Nigerian elections, one of the candidates was missing. Typically, when that happens, it's the incumbent's chair that goes empty, because if you're in power, a poor debate performance can cost you your job. So incumbents tend to want to limit their exposure. But that's not what happened in this case. President Goodluck Jonathan was there. It was his main rival, Muhammadu Buhari, refusing to take part. The debate was going out on one of Nigeria's most watched channels, Africa Independent Television, AIT. And Buhari's party has accused that channel of blatant partisanship, of being in President Jonathan's corner. So he boycotted the debate. This election was supposed to happen February 14th, but was postponed by the government, ostensibly to secure the Northeast from Boko Haram and guarantee the safety of voters there, although that rationale has been subject to debate as well. For journalists, this delay has meant another 6 weeks of trying to get around government censorship and pressure from other political parties on stories about corruption and security, as well as the dangers inherent in trying to cover the Boko Haram angle. In the run-up to voting day, there's been a backlog of visas for the foreign press, an indication that as far as the Jonathan government is concerned, the fewer reporters in there covering this story, the better. Our starting point this week is Abuja, the capital of Africa's most populous country. Five voices on the coverage of the Nigerian election. A spokesman for President Jonathan's party, the PDP. His opposite number, the communications director for the Buhari campaign, and the APC. The journalist turned author who once worked for Buhari. The journalist with a Nigerian news outlet that is based in New York, beyond the reach of the Nigerian authorities. And the managing director of AIT, the channel the opposition says is siding with the government, which is why the incumbent's main rival, Muhammadu Buhari, refused to appear on the presidential debate the channel broadcast live. The accusations against AIT center around the channel's election coverage, and this documentary in particular. Called The Real Buhari, it was an hour-long polemic aired on AIT that went well beyond the candidate's track record.
A man whose military regime became the first to sentence a woman to death by firing squad. Ramrod, stiff, never smiling. Only the future should matter, and nothing about him speaks to Nigeria's future.
We would have taken opportunity of any forum, any platform, to sell our candidate and our party. But definitely we were not ready to walk into a boo-boo trap, because we saw those who were organizing this debate as crassly partisan. And incidentally, many Nigerians agree with us also, because they've seen the kind of documentary that have been run against our leaders, so they did not see that platform as non-partisan.
A station like AIT, they've made it known that they are pro-Jonathan. I honestly cannot point at any instance, at least during this election period, that they've tried to be fair. I'm not defending the opposition party, but they've run an image-damaging documentary about the main presidential candidate of the opposition. They ran one about another member of that party. If they don't see anything wrong that the ruling party members have done, then they are not being fair.
We are not pro any party. I drive the wheel of professionalism in this organization, and I do not have any mandate to support anybody. Don't forget that we have quite a handful of political parties in Nigeria. Some of these parties are not equally endowed. There are parties that can't even pay for one advertisement slot. So if PDP, as the ruling party, tend to have more airplay, you probably They say who pays the piper. I mean, they probably have more money to throw around. That's the party in power. It's a case of, which side of the divide are you?
I don't see any clear divides. We've had a media, that's balanced stories, okay? We've had a media that's given everybody fair hearing. I have been on most of the media shows and I've not seen any hostility. I've been given, some fair hearing. So I want to disagree that the media is clearly divided. No, it's not, no.
There have been allegations aplenty of checkbook journalism in Nigeria involving not just the people at the top of major media outlets and not just during this campaign. An ever-present issue in domestic news coverage is bribery, what Nigerians call the culture of the brown envelope.
Let's say I'm interviewing a senator, you are the senator, and then at the end of it, you give me a brown envelope. I probably won't want to make you look bad when the video comes out because, some people say it's just like expressing their gratitude, whatever, but still, it's not ethical.
I'm not saying that some Nigerian journalists are not corrupt. Most media houses in Nigeria owe their workers sometimes up to 10 months, and they expect them to go to work every day. The people they interview understand this. So it is not very difficult to induce a Nigerian journalist. But he won't be the first person doing that in the Nigerian situation. Other professions are also as guilty.
You also need to understand the situation of so many of the journalists. And you also need to remember that journalism is not a profession that is well paid.
International news outlets are much better funded, but many of their journalists have been denied the visas they need to cover this story. According to the chief foreign correspondent at the British paper, The Telegraph, 20 media outlets in the UK have been left on the outside looking in, waiting for the paperwork to clear. Nobody has actually been refused outright, he wrote, but given that the process normally takes only a week, and given that my application went in 2 months ago, I'm beginning to think the Nigerian government doesn't want me there. Having their credentials in order did not stop 2 journalists from Al Jazeera English getting arrested in Borno, one of the 3 northern states most affected by the Boko Haram insurgency. Ahmed Idris and Ali Mustafa were detained for what the Nigerian army called loitering in a military zone. They were placed under house arrest of a sort in their hotel. Like almost all journalists, they've been restricted from covering the same insurgency the government cited when it postponed the election in the first place. That's the Nigerian media story as the country finally heads to the polls. A debate that a central figure boycotts because of a lack of trust in the channel that broadcast it. A culture of bribery, an ethical shortfall related to a shortage of money. And a scarcity of outside voices, thanks to the government and a bureaucracy that keep them out. What isn't lacking is interest in what's expected to be the closest election in Nigeria since 1999, when military rule came to an end.
Never have Nigerians been more interested in having a free and fair election. So everybody is interested, everybody is involved. But the Nigerian media, all these television stations and media outfits are owned by individuals. And those individuals have their political leanings. And as the saying goes, he who pays the piper dictates the tune.
On the download this week, our reviewers on the coverage of the political story in Nigeria.
With the glaring evidence of bias being displayed by most mainstream traditional media outlets in Nigeria, Nigerians are having to resort to self-help mechanisms. The internet, particularly Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp, are now very popular as news outlets. The unfortunate part of it is that the news you get from these outlets are not corroborated. It's sensational news.
Nigerians go to leadership and Sahara reporters for their independent, unbiased information. They seem to do more fact-checking when it comes to their sources, but more importantly, seem to get more accurate information out that is often verifiable.
Other media stories on our radar this week. The global news media have turned their lenses on Yemen as it descends into a state of civil war with some outside actors getting involved. And just prior to this escalation, a prominent journalist from one side of the story was shot to death in what looks like a political assassination. Abdul Karim Al-Kaiwani was killed as he came out of his house on March 18th in the capital, Sana'a. Al-Kaiwani first made his name for his reporting on the fighting in the northern province of Sada between forces loyal to the old Saleh government and fighters who backed the Houthi movement based there. He was imprisoned by the Saleh government for his journalism and would eventually become a spokesperson for the Houthis, who took control of Sana'a and most of the country last year. Amnesty International has said, given the history of intimidation and harassment Abdul Karim Al-Kaiwani faced for his outspoken journalism and his peaceful activism, his despicable killing smacks of a politically motivated assassination. The Paris-based Reporters Without Borders added, "We urge the authorities to carry out an independent investigation and to take whatever measures are necessary to protect journalists in Yemen." The battle over freedom of information online is being fought in many corners of the globe. This past week saw two developments in Turkey and India. On March 20th, the Turkish parliament passed a law giving the government the authority to ban any website it considers to be insulting, violating the right to privacy, or endangering the stability of the state. There is no court order required, and failure to comply with the law could result in hefty fines for owners. Critics are calling this the latest attack by the Turkish government on internet freedom. A similar bill was overturned by a constitutional court less than 6 months ago. President Tayyip Erdogan still has to sign this new bill into law, which is considered a formality. In the past, Erdogan has called Twitter a scourge, which probably confused his 6 million followers. And the Indian Supreme Court has struck down as unconstitutional an ambiguous section of a law called the Information Technology Act. In 2012, that section of the law was used in the arrest of two schoolgirls over a Facebook posting that one of them put up on politics in Mumbai. The second student simply hit the like button. A judge later rescinded those charges, and the Supreme Court has now killed that section of the law for good, calling it vague in its entirety. A few prominent Indians want to see all of the Information Technology Act thrown out. However, it appears that this ruling will be limited in scope and that the government will retain the power to censor websites that it disapproves of. The New York Times may still be blocked in China, but the Times is working on other ways of reaching Chinese audiences. On March 19th, the paper announced plans to launch a monthly magazine in Hong Kong and Macau. By May 1st, the magazine will be made available in hotels, airport lounges, and on the newsstands. It will focus on world news, opinion, with 20% of its pages devoted to local content. International news outlets trying to make inroads into China continue to face challenges. On March 19th, the Reuters website became inaccessible in the country. The Chinese authorities don't usually provide explanations for why foreign news sites are blocked. However, commentators are saying that Reuters' disappearance may have something to do with its coverage of the recent National People's Congress. Reuters now joins the New York Times, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, and the Hong Kong-based paper, the South China Morning Post, on the list of sites blocked in mainland China. For Indian news outlets, they're known as the Big Four, topics that are surefire ways to sell newspapers and get ratings. They are politics, big business, celebrities, which usually means Bollywood, and, of course, the Indian obsession with cricket. It's a news mix that has featured heavily during the exponential growth of Indian media over the past 25 years, but it's also pushed the stories of roughly 2/3 of the country's population to the margins, the edges of the news agenda. India has a population of 1.2 billion people, and more than 800 million of them live and work in rural areas. Despite that, and the vast array of news outlets in India, those outlets only had one full-time rural affairs editor, and his job has disappeared. When the daily paper that he worked for, The Hindu, restructured last year, according to him, in India's villages, you don't look for stories, they kick you in the face. The problem is there's almost no one working the beat. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the curious case of the Indian media's rural blind spot.
We have breaking news coming.
Not enough confidence in the market that the
promise to give you the first glimpse of what the capital has decided.
Our entire focus is on metropolitan India. What happens in Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, that makes the headlines.
There's no systematic coverage of rural India. The beat doesn't exist. In the Indian media, the post of rural affairs editor or rural editor existed just once. I was it.
This is a phenomenon that you find around the world where the voice of the nation is seen to be the voice of a middle class.
Why do you even need a phone that curves? Well, the correct answer to that is because you can.
It's almost as if we think viewers are not interested in rural India. So our entire hierarchy of news has very little space for rural India.
To understand just how little news coverage rural India gets, it helps to break down the news output. We asked an Indian media research firm to analyze the coverage of 3 mainstream English and Hindi newspapers for the months of November and December 2014. The results of that study showed that across the 6 papers, the percentage of front-page stories relating to rural India was 0, except for 1.37% of coverage in The Hindu in December 2014. On TV, an analysis of the primetime programming of 6 channels in November 2014 revealed that rural news didn't make it past 7% of total news time on any channel. In fact, it was as low as 0.19% on one outlet. That's a fifth of 1% of total coverage for almost 70% of the Indian population. The lack of rural coverage isn't because of a lack of news. In fact, in the past decade, one particular story has taken a serious turn for the worse.
In India, we've had an ongoing agrarian crisis in which 300,000 farmers have committed suicide since 1995. In the epicenter, the epicenter of these suicides is a region called Vidarbha in the state of Maharashtra in Western India, of which Mumbai is the capital.
You are invited to celebrate Indian Textiles Day.
In Mumbai, the great event of the year was the Lakme Fashion Week.
Bollywood heroine Priyanka Chopra showstopper-ga vyavaharinchi Fashion Week.
Day 4 of Lakme Fashion Week
saw a whole bunch of A-listers as front row guests.
1 hour away from this horrendous epidemic of suicides in Mumbai city, the Lakme Fashion Week drew 500 accredited journalists who sat there for a week. Now, I made a count. How many journalists from outside the affected region of suicides were actually covering the suicides and had actually spent a full week in that place? I counted 6, including myself and my collaborator.
There is a segment of India's media, and it's not insignificant, that gets across some of the news from beyond the boardrooms, the catwalks, and the city centres. It's the vernacular press. The papers publishing in languages other than English, like Marathi, Kannada, and Punjabi. Narasimha Reddy reports with the Telugu daily Nadu. It's the largest selling paper across the southern states of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Reddy has reported extensively for the paper on farmer suicides, racketeering in the irrigation industry, and large-scale displacements of entire villages of people cleared for industrial projects. But Reddy is the exception to the rule, and he has a theory on why papers like his are able to afford more space for rural reporting.
It is a fact that the big national papers have very little space for regional news, let alone rural reporting. But vernacular papers have a different approach. My own paper, Nadu, has published a significant number of stories from rural Andhra and Telangana. The reason for this is because the reporters, the management, we all have roots in the villages. When we go back home, we see the stories unfolding around us, and we report them as extensively as our publications can make space for.
It used to be a whole lot better. That old comfortable thought that the Indian language newspapers will always do a better job, that stands very threatened now. It stands very threatened because the same guy owns all the newspapers, whether they're in English or in Hindi or in Bengali or in Telugu or in Malayalam. It's a giant assembly line sausage factory. Right? You have English sausages or you have Hindi sausages, but you have sausages.
In India, the media market is crowded and competitive. Proprietors are looking for slick products that grab eyeballs, advertising, and, especially in the case of English language media, influence. There are significant investments into news reporting, but the beats are prioritized, and coverage of India's rural population is near the bottom. For instance, when P. Sainath resigned as rural affairs editor at The Hindu, it brought an end to the only such position in the entire Indian media landscape. The Hindu has not seen fit to replace him, and they didn't respond to our request for comment. The death of the rural affairs editorship says something about editorial priorities and about the 800 million Indians whose needs are going unserved, whose stories are going untold.
Let me be honest, the business model of television today is struggling to try and plow back investments into the business. I would like investment in a full-time agriculture editor. I would like a greater investment in the Northeast. And, report India not just through the eyes of Lutyens Delhi, but report India from every corner.
The rural beat is very different to covering politics or business. A lot of it is done on foot. You walk between villages, you interview people who aren't used to explaining their issues. Sometimes the travel itself takes a few days, and then it takes another couple of days to piece together complex situations. It takes time, effort, and a different use of resources than when you're covering politics.
Less and less investment is taking place in news gathering. As a result, you're looking for the soft option, which is the place which is 1 kilometer from your office, not the little village which is 1,000 kilometers away.
India's rural poor simply doesn't factor into the equation of India as a superpower, or indeed India's very image of itself as the world's largest democracy. So the rural poor are seen rather as a problem to be solved, and I think it's a huge mistake actually to view that many of the country's citizens as something that actually impede the country's progress.
If you want to get an insight into stories of rural India, there are a few alternative media outlets worth clicking onto. P. Sainath, who you saw in our report, runs a website called PARI, the People's Archive of Rural India. Apart from hosting and archiving rural reportage, the site covers the lifestyles, languages, professions, and arts of rural India. PARI is funded largely through donations. Much of the work is done by volunteers. CGNet Swara is a mobile news service based on phone technology that enables rural communities to record their own stories and access recordings of other stories from their area. Launched with some funding from the Washington, D.C.-based International Center for Journalists, CGNet Swara aims to, quote, democratize the media space. And for those of you who read Hindi, Gao Connection is an outlet that calls itself India's only rural newspaper. It's got a good website. The printed paper is distributed in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And just 9 months ago, India's state broadcaster Doordarshan commissioned journalists at Gao to produce a weekly TV show, episodes of which you can find on the Gao website. Finally, it was Pablo Picasso who said that art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. Or, as the musician formerly known as Terence Trent D'Arby put it, art is what you can get away with. Both of those quotations apply in their own way to our closing video. To promote a new street art collection from the Swedish franchise IKEA, a Dutch production company called Life Hunters took a piece of IKEA artwork, which would set you back about 10 euros in the store, and placed it alongside some paintings that are worth millions. They then asked some art aficionados to critique the work and appraise its value. The result, 2.25 million hits on YouTube, is priceless. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Dit is natuurlijk van een groot Zweeds kunstenaar, Ike Andrews. Van Ike Andrews. Ike Andrews, heeft u daar wel eens van gehoord?
De naam komt me heel vaak bekend voor.
Ja. Wat doet het met u als eerst meteen?
Ja, je wil even bekijken wat het nou eigenlijk precies allemaal voorstelt.
Nou, het ziet er interessant uit. Het is modern, het is shocking.
Dan zie ik wel dat het duidelijk gaat om het symbolisme erachter.
Met toch nostalgische attributen allemaal erin verwerkt.
Exact.
Dit is een verbeelding van zijn chaos in zijn geest.
Heeft u een idee wat de waarde hiervan zou kunnen zijn?
Dit koop je niet bij de expo, snap je?
Nee, exact.
Ja.
Exact.
200.000 euro's. 666.000.
Als je dit voor 2,5 miljoen zou kunnen kopen, zou ik het doen. Als het meer is, dan zou ik afhaken.
Ja. Het leuke aan dit doek is dat het van IKEA is.